Have you ever felt like something is out of place? As if the world, so full of information and connections, is slowly losing its logic. Maybe you've paused for a moment, looked around, and asked yourself, does any of this still make sense? That feeling, almost impossible to describe, might be the first sign that we are crossing into what many call the end of sanity. By sanity, we're not just talking about individual mental health, but something bigger, the collective balance that holds our perception of reality together. Think about it. If we all agree that the sky is blue, it gives us a common foundation. But what happens when we start to disagree about even the simplest things? When reality begins to fracture, what's left? Recent history is filled with signs of this collapse. In 2020, as the pandemic swept across the globe, conspiracy theories like vaccines containing microchips spread at an alarming rate. These weren't just individual beliefs. They shaped policies and divided communities. The World Health Organization reported that misinformation created resistance to vaccination, impacting millions of lives. And here lies the central question of this video. What's really happening? Are we losing our collective sanity? Or are we just awakening to the fragility of what we thought was real? Throughout this video, we'll explore this question by intertwining science, philosophy, and our existential crises. Get ready to embark on a journey through the human mind, the chaos of the modern world, and the depths of the questions that define our existence. And along the way, perhaps we'll discover whether the end of sanity is truly the end, or the beginning of something new. In recent years, it feels like chaos has become the only constant. We live in a world saturated with information, where everything happens all at once and everywhere. A study by the University of California revealed that the average person consumes around 34 gigabytes of information daily. That's the equivalent of watching over 16 hours of video every day. But can our brains, designed to hunt and survive in small tribes, handle this avalanche? This overload comes at a cost. It's evident in the rising levels of anxiety, the growing sense of disconnection, and the sharp increase in mental health diagnoses. The World Health Organization reported a 25% global rise in depression and anxiety cases after 2020. This mental strain, combined with global crises like climate change, social inequality, and pandemics, creates a perfect storm for a collective psychological collapse. But there's something deeper at play. This sense of chaos isn't just a reaction to external events. It arises because the narratives we use to organize the world are falling apart. Historically, we've relied on stories to give meaning to our existence, whether they are religious, scientific, or cultural. Yet in the digital age, no story seems to remain intact for long. Without solid narratives, gaps emerge, and those gaps are filled with conspiracy theories, fear, and confusion. The result is a world where even basic facts are questioned. As Nietzsche wrote, "There are no facts, only interpretations." When every interpretation seems valid, how do we find common ground to move forward? In this context, chaos isn't just a personal experience. It's a reflection of a global system in collapse. But does this mean the end of everything? Or are we merely transitioning into something new? In the next chapters, we'll dive deeper into how this fragility manifests in the modern world and what it could mean for the future of humanity. What is sanity? The most common definition comes from psychology, the ability to perceive reality logically, make coherent decisions, and maintain functional relationships. But does this definition capture everything? Or are we dealing with something far more complex and perhaps more fragile than we realize? Michel Foucault, in his analysis of madness, argued that the line between sanity and insanity is drawn by society. He wrote, Madness is the absence of a work. In other words, what we consider normal is determined by the rules of social systems. But what happens when those rules are arbitrary or begin to shift? History offers us examples. In past centuries, behaviors that are now accepted, like rejecting traditional marriage or pursuing scientific knowledge, were once labeled as signs of insanity. During the Middle Ages, those who strayed from religious norms were branded as heretics or even possessed. This shows that sanity is often less about truth and more about conformity to the prevailing narrative. And what happens when those narratives, which sustain this sense of sanity, start to crumble? A classic example is the Salem witch trials in the 17th century. Fear and paranoia led an entire community to believe witches lived among them. This phenomenon, known as collective hysteria, reminds us how human perception can be warped by fear and a lack of control. In the modern world, the witches of Salem have been replaced by new enemies. Today, conspiracy theories fill the gaps left by the collapse of traditional narratives. A study in the Journal of Cyberpsychology, 2021, revealed that people exposed to fake news are more likely to believe in conspiracies, especially in times of crisis. This raises a critical question. Is our collective sanity as fragile as the narratives that uphold it? Philosophy provides further insight. Nietzsche, for instance, warned us about the death of God, not as a religious statement, but as the loss of a central narrative. He wrote, "God is dead, and we have killed him." Without this moral and existential anchor, humanity is left to create its own meanings. This newfound freedom is empowering, but also exposes us to chaos. When you think about it, what we call sanity might just be a shield against the enormity of the unknown. But this shield is constantly challenged by crises, both personal and collective. When chaos appears, cracks begin to form. And it's in those moments we see just how fragile the construction of reality truly is. In the upcoming chapters, we'll explore how this fragility manifests in the modern world and what it could mean for humanity's future. Is sanity truly as solid as it seems? Or is it always on the brink of collapse? As chaos grows, it becomes clear that we're not just dealing with individual crises, but symptoms of a system in collapse. Our institutions, economic, environmental, and social, seem increasingly unable to sustain the promises they've made. The fractures in these systems are impossible to ignore, and they're driving us closer to what feels like a collective breaking point. The evidence is all around us. Reports from the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, warn that global carbon emissions continue to rise despite international agreements. Simultaneously, recurring economic crises leave millions in vulnerable positions, reinforcing the feeling that the future is precarious. This landscape creates fertile ground for collective insanity, where fear replaces reason. How do people respond to this crumbling system? Often they turn to denial. This denial can take many forms, from ignoring the problems entirely to embracing nihilistic beliefs that nothing matters because the world is already doomed. This behavior, known as passive nihilism, is a form of escapism, but not everyone runs away. Some channel the chaos into action, embodying what Nietzsche called active nihilism, the creation of new values and meanings in the face of emptiness. But what happens when an entire society succumbs to collective insanity? History offers examples. During the Great Depression of the early 20th century, economic despair fueled the rise of extremist ideologies, like Nazism. Today we face similar challenges, amplified by the speed and reach of digital communication. The internet, while connecting us, also spreads misinformation at an unprecedented rate, fueling panic and polarization. Philosophers like Hannah Arendt warned that, in times of crisis, Humanity often seeks simple answers to complex problems. This may explain the rise of authoritarian movements and extreme ideologies in response to global instability. When chaos intensifies, people crave order at any cost, even if it means sacrificing rationality or freedom. It becomes clear that collective insanity isn't just an accident. It's a reflection of the collapse of structures that once kept our reality intact. But does this collapse signal the end? Or could it be the beginning of something transformative? In the next chapters, we'll explore how this fine line between sanity and insanity could paradoxically lead us to a new way of understanding the world. Have you ever looked up at the night sky and tried to comprehend the vastness of the universe? That overwhelming feeling of awe is where the fine line between sanity and insanity begins. It's the threshold where our brains struggle to organize the chaos of existence to protect us, but sometimes lose themselves in the process. Science shows us that the human brain is a pattern-making machine. Research published in Nature Neuroscience, 2019, reveals that our minds fill in gaps to create a coherent perception of reality. This is why we see faces in clouds or hear familiar words in random noise. While this ability helps us navigate the world, it also makes us vulnerable to illusions, believing in things that aren't real, such as conspiracy theories or personal delusions. This natural tendency of the brain is further explored in studies on false memories. In one well-known experiment, researchers successfully implanted memories of events that participants never experienced. If even our memories, the core of our identity, can be manipulated, how can we trust what's real? The philosophy of mind delves deeper into this complexity. René Descartes famously argued that the mind and body are separate entities. But what if they're inseparable and equally chaotic? This challenges our traditional view of sanity as something controlled and rational, suggesting instead that it's a delicate balance between our rational and irrational impulses. Culturally, we've examined this balance through works like Fight Club and Joker. These characters portray the breakdown of individual and collective reality, illustrating how insanity can emerge as a reaction to oppression or existential emptiness. They force us to ask, is insanity merely a collapse, or could it be a form of liberation? Nietzsche offers an intriguing perspective. He wrote about the abyss, the moment when we confront the void of meaninglessness. He who fights with monsters should see to it that he himself does not become a monster, he warned. Facing the abyss is dangerous, but it also holds the potential for creation. In Nietzsche's view, insanity might not signify the end of reason, but the birth of a new way of seeing the world. This brings us to a profound existential question. What if the line between sanity and insanity is simply a construct? Something we invented to feel secure in an inherently chaotic universe. After all, sanity isn't defined by absolute logic, but by collective agreement. When that agreement dissolves, the line vanishes too. In the next chapters, we'll examine whether the chaos we feel is an opportunity for rebirth or a sign of our descent into the void. While chaos often feels like the end, history teaches us that it's also the beginning of transformation. Just as a star explodes in a supernova to create new elements, the breakdown of sanity can pave the way for new ways of thinking and living. But how do we turn collapse into opportunity? A powerful example comes from the Renaissance. After centuries of darkness during the Middle Ages, societal crises eventually led to an explosion of creativity and innovation. Thinkers and artists began to question long-held dogmas and rediscovered the potential of the human spirit. Could the turmoil we face today lead to a similar rebirth? Philosophically, Søren Kierkegaard offers a hopeful perspective. He believed that anxiety is the price of freedom. To him, facing the unknown forces us to make choices that define who we are. In other words, chaos is an invitation to transformation. It's a chance to break free from outdated systems and embrace the uncertainty as a space to create something new. Science, too, supports this idea of adaptability. Studies on neuroplasticity show that the brain can rewire itself even under extreme stress. This remarkable flexibility means that, even in times of crisis, we have the capacity to rebuild our perception of reality and find new meaning. Ultimately, chaos reminds us that sanity, as we've defined it, was never a fixed state. It's a dynamic balance, constantly challenged by new realities and ideas. The end of sanity, then, doesn't have to be a fall into despair. Instead, it can be an opportunity to reimagine what's possible and to question the boundaries we once thought were unbreakable. In the final chapter, we'll tie everything together and reflect on what this chaos could mean for humanity's future. Is it a harbinger of destruction or a spark for transformation? We've reached the end of this journey, but the central question remains. What does the end of sanity truly mean? Is it the collapse of everything we know? Or does it reveal that sanity, as we understood it, was never truly solid to begin with? Looking at the world around us, it's easy to feel like we're standing at the edge of an abyss. But as we've explored, chaos doesn't have to mean the end. Nietzsche showed us that confronting the void can spark the creation of new meanings. Kierkegaard saw anxiety as the gateway to freedom. And science reveals that even our brains are wired to adapt and evolve under pressure. The end of sanity could, in fact, be the beginning of something much larger. An opportunity to re-examine our narratives, challenge our beliefs, and explore what it truly means to exist. Perhaps the fragility of reality is not a flaw, but a feature. A reminder that we are always capable of reimagining ourselves and the world around us. And now, the question turns to you. Is chaos something to fear, or is it something to embrace? Is it an obstacle, or is it the foundation for transformation? As you reflect on these questions, remember that we're not alone in this. Chaos may feel isolating, but it's a shared experience. A moment where humanity collectively grapples with what comes next. Thank you for joining this exploration. If this video made you think or question something, share your thoughts in the comments below. Often it's in the questions, not the answers, that we find the most profound insights. And perhaps in this vast and chaotic universe, sanity was never real to begin with. But in the unknown, we may find our truest freedom.